I'm Josh. I hope you're having a great Outlier conference so far, and thanks for tuning in to Accessibility, the key to unlock your best data visualization. I want to let you know that I am going to be providing audio descriptions for my slides, but there may be gaps between audio descriptions, and that's just because most of my slides are just decorative. On this slide, we have a campfire icon because I want to start with a story before we even get to the agenda. And this is a story of a man and woman in love, early 19th century. And it was a cross-country long-distance relationship that was maintained and really thrived through love letters. But one week the man didn't get a letter back, and he anxiously waited, and then after a few weeks started to fear for the worst. So he hastily traveled to her town, and when he got there, he discovered she had not been sending letters because she couldn't see to write. An accident had made her blind. Now, he was an inventor by trade and couldn't stay with her, but was not willing to let this relationship go. And in his prior work, he'd encountered research and patents for machines that had levers that could leave impressions or indentations in paper. And so he sought out with his blind lover to invent a machine where there was a predefined pattern of buttons she could memorize, and pushing a button would then take one of those levers and leave an impression in paper, but push through carbon paper to leave a little bit of ink in that impression. That's the typewriter. Pellegrino Turi invented the typewriter and carbon paper so that his blind friend could write letters. And I did dramatize it, a little bit of romance, kind of James Cameron, Titanic, Jack and Rose style there. Makes for a much better hook than if I just read you the facts right off of a slide in a bullet list. But the point here is that if you're watching this, you use a descendant of assistive technology meant to help a blind person write letters. Whether it was a physical keyboard or a virtual keyboard, you used a keyboard to access this presentation. Began as assistive technology and transformed society. Telephones were initially a form of research to help the deaf and hard of hearing be able to hear. Touchscreens were initially heavily influenced by research into helping people with mobility impairments access the virtual world when they couldn't use a mouse or a keyboard. Texting was more heavily adopted and expanded when cell phone carriers realized that it was a way to reach deaf and hard of hearing customers. Audiobooks, invented for people that couldn't physically see words on a page or a screen. Voice recognition, again, assistive technology for mobility impairments for people that are unable to access or use a touchscreen or a mouse or a keyboard. And even the internet, invented in part by a person that was hard of hearing. All of this technology was invented for or by or heavily influenced by people with disabilities. And technically, this isn't accessibility we're talking about right now. This is assistive technology, but the same concept holds true. It was this kind of technology for people with disabilities that has transformed society, innovated, and disrupted. My goal today is to inspire you and challenge you. My goal is not to give you answers. That's going to have to come from you. So finally, to the agenda. I want to give you a brief introduction so you know where I'm coming from, my position, and you can have your critical eye or ear into what I'm saying. I want to ask if we're talking about accessibility all wrong. And then I want to go through some case studies on what happens when accessibility becomes the focus. And I want to show a few things that I'm really excited about in data visualization. And then I want to issue a challenge to you. A quick disclaimer on language. I'm going to use identity first language, so disabled people, as opposed to person first, which would be like people with disabilities. I'll probably bounce back and forth for like grammatical convenience periodically, but I tend to lean toward disabled people. That's my preference as a disabled person, and overwhelmingly the disabled people that I've spoken to and read prefer identity first language, despite what I've seen in some best practices. A quick note about me, I'm a UX researcher and designer at a Fortune 25 retailer. I do some accessibility and inclusive design freelancing for small and local businesses that want to reach disabled customers, but can't really afford the at-scale accessibility consulting, and that's through what I call Moxie Ally or Moxie A11Y. A11Y is shorthand for accessibility and the accessibility community. I'm also a part-time volunteer public folklorist. I'm shameless plug. If you go to imjacklope.art, my portfolio, you may or may not find a documentary I made with my city about local ghost stories. Around the accessibility space, I am an International Association of Accessibility Professionals Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, or CPAC if you don't want the mouthful. I'm also a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Section 508 Trusted Tester, which is a government methodology in performing a little bit more technical testing on websites. And I'm also a Tableau 2019 IronViz co-champion. So I'm just kind of showing a little bit of my background and experience. I'm also disabled, so that heavily influences my perspective and what all you're about to hear. So my question for all of us is, are we talking about accessibility all wrong? What I usually hear is accessibility as a requirement. So on this slide, we have a stick figure that is looking in the direction of a over-exaggerated in size checklist. That checklist has a checkbox next to something that says 1.1.1, non-text content with a check mark in it, and another one 1.2.1, audio and video only with a check mark in it, and it kind of keeps going off the screen with a bunch of examples. And the stick figure is saying accessibility is a requirement. We need to be inclusive. We need to make sure design meets WCAG AA. And that's what these checkboxes are all from. WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and AA is that standard that most organizations, when they aim for accessibility, that's what they aim for, is AA. This isn't bad. It's not wrong. We do need to make accessibility a requirement, and we do need to be inclusive, and we do need to make sure our designs conform to WCAG requirements. But this puts accessibility in the back seat. So in this slide, we have a stick figure looking at this really cartoonishly drawn radar chart, and there's Comic Sans text pointing to it that says super cool viz, and underneath it says alt boring description. And the stick figure is saying, this super cool visual looks super cool. Now let's add alt text for screen readers. And don't get me wrong, alt text can be written in extremely creative and entertaining and engaging ways, but it's usually not. And we will put all this effort into this incredible visual experience and then just have a few sentences of alt text there. And accessibility takes a back seat. So what happens when it's not just a requirement, but it's actually a focus? I'm going to go through some case studies outside the space of data visualization to just kind of show some innovation and disruption. NPR went through and added transcripts for their podcasts, and the inbound traffic increased by over 500,000 views. And this allowed deaf and hard of hearing to access their podcast content, and was also helpful for people that may have auditory processing challenges like I do. And in total, 7% of all users accessed these transcripts. NHS, the National Health Service, simplified their website navigation, and their daily users increased over 73%. And simpler website navigation helps assistive technology users as well as neurodivergent users, users with cognitive disabilities. You may also be like, it sounds like it helps everyone. I mean, who out there has said, boy, I wish this website were a lot harder to navigate? And the NHS was able to reach AAA conformance in 98% of their pages in just 16 months. They had a massive return here. Tesco added a blind-friendly version of their site and increased their annual revenue by £13 million. That's £24 million adjusting for inflation. And they projected that if all UK blind people shopped at Tesco, it would generate an additional £190 million just at Christmas. And that's £345 million adjusted for today's money. It's not considered best practice to have a separate site for assistive technology users or disabled users. But the point here is that Tesco focused on an accessible user experience, at least for a certain group of people. And there was a huge return on that. In my own freelancing work, some of my clients are becoming the only option for more than 25% of their target population. There's nowhere for people to go around these nonprofits, educators, and yoga studios. The entire disabled population is often ignored. And so by putting accessibility at the forefront and really making it a part of their business strategy, they're finding ways to reach and serve tens of thousands of customers. In each of these cases, accessibility wasn't just a requirement, it became a priority. And we can see really cool results coming out of the data viz space too. So in this slide, you're seeing a picture of space. That's the Hubble telescope images from NASA. A whole bunch of stars, and then there's kind of like a pinkish area and a bluish area. And across the entire image is a gray bar. It's vertically oriented, and then there's also line charts, also vertically oriented, coming off of that gray bar. One is pink and one is blue, kind of making little hills. And from the video, I took this from, we don't have enough time to watch the video in this presentation, but in the video, this bar moved across the screen and those two line charts adjusted along with the sounds we were hearing. And what this is data sonification. NASA took the same data they used to make these images and they made sound with it. And it really is this beautiful music. And as a result, they went internationally mainstream. On this slide, you're seeing screenshots of headlines from periodicals around the world. We've got like NPR, Smithsonian, BBC, Washington Post, Digital Trends, Fox News. And if you Google search it, Google search NASA sonification, you're going to find dozens of articles on this. But what's important here is they're not calling out the images, they're calling out the accessibility innovation, the sonification. That sonification allowed people to experience the beauty and wonder of what those telescopes found, even if they couldn't see the images. And that's what went viral. I don't know about you, but I can't remember other data visualization projects that went internationally mainstream or written about by dozens of news outlets around the world. Maybe with the exception of a certain hand-drawn hurricane map for a hurricane projection made by a president of a certain country. I really can't remember other data viz that went that viral. I wanted to highlight some of the other cool things happening in the data viz world from an accessibility standpoint. Vise is a really cool research prototype that allows users to summarize, analyze data, create charts, customize their charts, even create entire dashboards using voice commands. The screenshot here we have shows kind of a general dashboard page, a couple of KPIs, and then it's cut off below that because the emphasis is on a pop-up on that dashboard page that says Vise has created charts for you to help with your analysis. You can customize them as per your liking or delete them using voice commands. So no longer do we need to use our hands and our eyes to explore data. We can talk to our data. This is huge for individuals with mobility impairments or visual impairments or assistive technology users. But you can also see how this really could transform data analysis in general. You're stuck in traffic on the way to work, just talk to your data. You don't even need to take your eyes off the road. You can start exploring it while you're driving. There's so many really cool possibilities coming out of this technology that's starting as assistive tech. Large language models are greatly reducing the technical expertise barriers to do data visualization and data analysis. So in a really cool Nightingale article, Soon Paik demonstrated how ChatGPT walked them from the initial Python installation into data prep all the way through front-end development. We have a screenshot here of a prompt and a response. And the prompt to ChatGPT says, now please write a JavaScript code for the HTML you wrote above. And it details 6 further requirements. And the response from ChatGPT says, sure, here's JavaScript code that will. It recaps those requirements and then presents well-formatted and easy to read code. And using large language models in this way seems to really benefit people that have intellectual or cognitive or learning disabilities, neurodivergent users. It can even help people with assistive technology. There's a lot of promise in the accessibility space here. We do need to call out that there are ethical issues, particularly with disabled people, ethical issues in large language models, and there are human rights issues. And discussing those is outside of the scope of the presentation. But the point is there's technology really ripe to help disabled people. That's also an innovation that can help everyone. In a Nightingale article, Doug Shepard said something that completely reframed data visualization forever for me. The simple fact is that data visualization is assistive technology. It's cognitive assistive technology. Our amped up monkey brains aren't good at seeing patterns in numbers, but they're great at discerning patterns in topological space. So we map numbers to colors, location, size, and other visual symbols, and suddenly we can understand trends and relationships. RJ Andrews talks about the exact same thing, just coming at it from something besides an accessibility angle. Data visualization is assistive technology that transformed society. It unlocked for humans a whole new level of reasoning and capabilities. Accessibility isn't just a requirement, it is in and of itself a form of innovation. This is the part in the presentation where most presenters would show you how to do the thing, but I'm not going to do that because I don't know how to do the thing. I'm here because I believe that all of you can figure it out. I believe that you are innovative, that you are creative, and that you can do extremely innovative things with accessibility and data visualization. So my challenge to you is I want to see you presenting at Outlier. I want to see your presentation next year or the year after about how you put accessibility as the focus of a project and how it made your data visualization so cool, so innovative, how it took it to the next level. I want to hear your presentation on that. And I'm not going to completely leave you hanging. I've got 3 tips here. So tip number 1, learn the standards. Yes, we need to move beyond requirements, but it's still requirements. Basic standards are foundational to making sure our innovations are still accessible to everyone. And sometimes it's also legally required. So nothing I'm saying here is an excuse to ignore the standards or best practices. Learn them because they are the foundation. Tip number 2, I love the how might we approach, sometimes abbreviated to HMW. Designers often do this in group design exercises or workshops. It helps frame a constraint or requirement as a possibility and an opportunity. So how might we hear data? How might we talk to data? How might we feel data? Or even we could say, how might we explore data if we can't see a data visualization? There's multiple ways to frame it, but the point is the constraint becomes an opportunity and you step into the world of possibilities. The third tip, nothing about us without us. Design with disabled people. And at minimum, this means getting feedback from disabled people, but more ideally, invite them into your design process. There's an idea called co-design, where you can bring your users in and help you during the actual design phase. And you can do that with disabled people, or most ideal, hire people with disabilities, work with them, put them in positions of leadership, and give them decision-making influence in your organization and in your designs. And that's really going to help you drive the most accessibility innovation into your work. That's all I got for you. So quick recap. Accessibility is a path to innovation. Time and time again, you can link major societal transformations and technological disruptions back to disabled people and tools and technology made for them or made by them. And so that is the way you can level up your data visualization game. And that's my challenge to you, is level up your data visualization game through accessibility as a path to innovation, and then apply and get to speak at Outlier so that I get to see that cool thing you did at a future Outlier conference. Thanks so much. Love you all.
Hey, that was a great talk. Josh is such an amazing storyteller. Don't you all agree? Yeah. All right. So Josh is live with us virtually. Do we have any questions from the audience? You can again go up to the mics. For our virtual attendees, please use the chat feature in the virtual platform so that way we make sure we get those questions answered for you. All right, to my left. Oh, I'm sorry, speak right into it. Speak loud and proud. That's what I tell my kids.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. I just want to thank Josh for that talk real quick. It was very interesting. As someone who writes a lot of alt text descriptions right now that are very boring, I'm wondering if you have, I know you said you weren't going to tell us how to do it, but do you have any examples or just ways to think about it? I mean, how might we write more exciting alt text descriptions?
That's a great question. Josh, would you like to give an approach?
Yes, and Emily, I can see you. If you can hear me, just give like a really big hand wave over exaggerated because you're tiny on my screen. Yep, awesome. Okay. How might we write more exciting alt text? You're kind of yanking me back to my days of creative writing and poetry, because poetry has to be really, really concise, and alt text has to be really, really concise too. And I personally have really struggled in this area. So I'd honestly love to hear more of your lessons. Where I've personally struggled is there are so many insights jam-packed into a visualization, but alt text, like really keep those best practices around 2 sentences or so. I can't explain a visual in 2 sentences to a person that can see it. It's going to be really hard when a person can't see it. So there's a lot there. When I have tried to write alt text, though, I do go back to a background in poetry and think about which words are really going to, I don't want to say dramatize because that almost sounds too much, but which words are really going to emphasize and call it out and bring out the story. So if I'm trying to draw more of a story in my visual and I'm trying to show how meaningful this increase is, I can say it increased, or I can say it's skyrocketed. I can use these sort of visual metaphors or powerful visual, being in air quotes there, powerful metaphors that can kind of story tell within that short text. But that's what I do. I'm not going to guarantee that that's perfect. I'm not going to guarantee that people that use screen readers appreciate that as much as other techniques. So it would be great to connect and hear some of your learnings and see if there's a way that we can come up with some new ideas.
Great, thank you. And we have another question.
Hi, yeah, my name is Elizabeth. I kind of want to tack on to the last question. I hope it's not redundant. So I also write a lot of alt text and am a long-winded person, so I'm frequently annoyed by character count limits. And I'm wondering, you talked about poetry, which is a great solution. Do you have any other creative solutions you've found when you run up against sort of the technical, nuts and bolts limitations of, wanting to make something more accessible and running into the limitations of the systems you're working with? I guess that's in a nutshell. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm hearing, do we have any alt text recommendations when we're running up against like technical issues like a character limitation? I do know it's a frequent recommendation in the accessibility community to keep your alt text short, but then point to longer descriptions elsewhere. I think of this sometimes as like a double click when you can see and interact with the chart. I can see a tooltip, or I might be able to click on a data point and it automatically drills down. So can I have a concise description of a visual, but if I can't get that nugget in there, especially if it's interactive, Is there a way for me to say, if you need the longer description, check out something over here instead? And then even ideally, if the chart's interactive, allowing that, especially with some of the AI tools and narrative science, et cetera, allowing that longer description to be generated intelligently so that as the chart changes, that longer description and their double click, their kind of drill down changes as well. I hope that answered your question, Elizabeth.
Great, thank you. We have a question from the virtual audience.
Yeah, we have two questions actually from the virtual audience. One is more of general information. There seems to be a lot of interest around learning more about the VISE research prototype that you alluded to. So maybe you can say a word about that. And then there's a question, how can you remove bias from alt text for a data visualization?
That last question threw me for a loop. That's going to be a big one. Okay, so for the first one, I should have mentioned it in the recording. The PowerPoint that will be made available, I threw like lots of little historical facts and things like that out there. There's going to be sources all throughout. So I can jump in the chat after this and grab the source for that VISE and toss it in there, get you that research paper. As for removing bias from alt text, I think for me, the big thing is thinking about how that's going to be different than in other spaces. So we come back to where I said, like, use the term skyrocketed. There could be terms or times where that feels like an over-exaggeration or an over-dramatization, and maybe skyrocketed isn't neutral enough. But that's going to be true as well as if I'm just putting regular copy or annotations on a chart. So I think it's trying to figure out the stance. Having said that, what threw me for a loop is I tend to question where bias fits and where we should be unbiased and where we shouldn't be unbiased. The last presentation we had, that was not an unbiased presentation. That presentation came with a point of view. That presentation had a very strong perspective, and that's what I really loved about it. And so are there times where I think things need to be neutral? Yes. But I also think there's a lot of times where we question ourselves on, like, do we need to bring our perspective and our bias? And do we need to be strong and emphatic about it? If I'm going to make a chart about how people with disabilities are discriminated against, I'm going to bring that emphasis, and I'm not going to worry about being unbiased. My perspective is what I'm bringing in, and that's what I'm trying to convince you of. So that's where my head goes when I think about bias. In the alt text space, I think it's just going to be the same thing elsewhere, of just double checking our work and our word usage and how we're phrasing things.
All right, let's do two last questions. To my right, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question that's maybe a little bit more broad than alt text. I only recently became aware of like Chrome DevTools accessibility like helpers that help you even just identify like, oh, what is your text contrast and things. And so I was wondering if there were other like amazing, excellent tools that you could recommend for us as we're thinking about how might we blank. And we're designing these new visualizations with accessibility forefront that you would recommend that we go to try and do this as well.
Yes. Are there other tools out there like Chrome DevTools that can help us with accessibility checkers? Yes. And I can toss some in the chat. I love to kind of go back and forth between two or run a website check through both of them. So one is going to be the Wave tool by WebAIM, and the other is going to be the Axe Dev Toolkit. Both of those together seem to catch a lot of issues for me. But one thing I want to call out is these automated checkers. Research shows they only catch about 30% of things. So it's really important to learn those best standards and realize that there still may be 70% of issues that aren't getting caught by those checkers. And so pairing that up with just a very close examination of what you're making is going to help make sure that you're seeing that other 70%. Great question.
All right, and to my left, and our last question.
Thanks so much for the talk. I wanted to also just thank you I really appreciated that you read everything that was on the screen. It made it really easy to take notes because I didn't have to worry about looking up and making sure I got everything. I had a question about generative AI and wondering, because we're at the stage where those products are being really aggressively marketed and sold to us, are there red flags or places that you have identified that you think their promise for disabled people is overstated, or that you would say like, okay, that's part of the 70% that like can't be automated, or yeah, just a word of advice for how to avoid the snake oil?
Yeah. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. That's the easy thing. So, got to be careful with what I say here, because another accessibility expert actually got hit with what's called a slap, a fake lawsuit, in order to get him to shut up. But accessibility overlays. So, this idea that I can plug code into a website and it will automatically make my website conform it. If you look up the stats on that, I don't want to misquote and get a lawsuit on me, but if you look up the stats, a massive number of the disability lawsuits were on websites that had those overlays. So that's AI technology that's promising to fix everything. Problematic there. Even when you think about gen models, I saw a really good talk in an accessibility conference about how those models kind of by nature, because they're really kind of hedging toward the best prediction, they tend to ignore some of those outliers, which is where people with disabilities live. They're less represented in the data. So anything that's AI based really needs a lot of care and effort and attention from a disability perspective before we can really trust how it's going to help people with disabilities. Any marketing you see, I think, just needs to have a huge grain of salt. And I want to see it demonstrated over and over and over again that it helps people with disabilities and tested with them and has the disability community stamp of approval in general. They're not homogenous, but the general stamp of approval before I'm comfortable even recommending a product or using it. Great question.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Josh and for all of our questions, both virtually and in person. Thank you for your participation. Josh, thank you so much. And now, oh yeah, give a big round of applause. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.